Born on October 24th, 1955 in Australia, Katherine Mary Knight was the product of an affair between her mother, Barbara Rogan, and her father, Ken Knight. And when their secret rendezvous came to light, it rocked their small conservative town. Now, after this tumultuous time, Katherine's childhood was a genre of movies that kept going from just horror to horror. And her father was a violent alcoholic who sexually abused her mother every day, and Katherine as well claims that she was sexually assaulted by several family members until the age of 11. And then in school growing up, Katherine was known as a bully who terrorized smaller children without ever learning how to read or write. And she quit school at the age of 15 to work at a clothing factory a year later. And then she got her dream job at a slaughterhouse cutting out the internal organs of animals. In fact, Katherine Knight loved her job so much that she hung her first set of butcher's knives over her bed, just in case she ever wanted to use them. And eventually, she did. Now, while working in the butcher shop, Katherine met David Kellett, an alcoholic much like her father, who was often violent, especially with hitting. And since Katherine was used to this kind of violence, she surprised David when she actually fought back during one of these drunken scuffles. And David soon realized that Katherine was capable of doing damage with her fists, and before long he found himself being dominated by her. Then in 1974, she convinced him to marry her, and he was heavily intoxicated the entire time. And Katherine's own mother even warned him about her daughter's temper, saying that Katherine had a screw loose somewhere. Now, on the night they got married, Kellett woke up and managed to fight off Katherine as she tried to strangle and kill him because, well, it's really inappropriate. So comment me below if you want to know this particular reason. I don't feel comfortable sharing it. Okay. But even though she attempted to kill him only one day into their marriage somehow lasted for 10 more years and was far from perfect because Kellett was often unfaithful and once even just left his wife and their 2 daughters in the middle of the night. After discovering one of Kellett's affairs, Katherine placed their 2-month-old infant on the local train tracks shortly before a train was due. But luckily, that train never came. So then she also threatened several people with a stolen axe. She was also diagnosed with postnatal depression after witnesses saw her violently pushing and swinging her second child in a stroller down a busy street. So she spent a few months in a psychiatric hospital and told nurses that she intended to kill a mechanic who had fixed Kellett's car because that made it possible for him to leave her. Yeah, she was definitely a little bit off her rocker. But despite this threat, Kellett actually took Katherine back when she was released from the hospital. But their reunion didn't last long. So Katherine went through a period of deep distress after Kellett finally did leave her. Then after this, in 1986, she jumped into a relationship with David Saunders, who was a local miner. And then within a few months, Saunders moved in with her and her 2 daughters. But he kept his apartment to the side. And Katherine became extremely jealous and suspicious about what he did when she wasn't around. So, like her previous relationships, this one quickly grew toxic and violent as well. In fact, as disturbing as this is, she slit the throat of his 2-month-old dingo puppy in front of him just to show him what she was capable of. And despite this, Saunders stayed with her, and they had a child together 1 year later. But then finally after this, he left her because she tried to kill him with a pair of scissors. Then she met a man named John Chillingworth. and they stayed together for 3 years and had another child. And while no violent incidents were reported about their relationship, it ended after Chillingworth learned that Katherine was having an affair with a man named John Charles Thomas Price. Getting complicated, I know, but stay with me because it's about to get way crazier. So at the beginning of Katherine and John Price's relationship, it was going smoothly, and he had 2 older children who lived with him, and he made enough money as a minor to keep Katherine happy. So they moved in together in 1995, and things were still going pretty good. But once again, Katherine wanted to get married, but this time he declined. So Katherine turned violent, and Katherine framed Price for stealing things from his company and got him fired. Though he initially kicked her out, a few months later, they started seeing each other again. But this time, he refused to let her move back in, and according to their friends and neighbors, Katherine's violence then began to escalate even more. Then, in February of the year 2000, a big argument between John and Katherine ended with her attempting to stab him in the chest. So he took out a restraining order against her in an attempt to keep his children safe. Then, toward the end of that month, John said that he was concerned for his safety and told his co-workers that if he ever went missing, it was because Katherine Knight indeed killed him. And let's just say he was right to have this instinctive feeling. And then on February 29th in the year 2000, John Price came home from work and followed his usual routine of checking in with the neighbors before going to bed at about 11 p.m. And then Katherine came home shortly after, made herself dinner, watched TV, showered, and then went upstairs. She woke up John, the 2 of them had intercourse, and then he went back to bed. Then Katherine Knight took a butcher's knife from next to her bed where she always kept them, and she stabbed John. And then she stabbed him 37 times. Plus, according to the evidence, actually, he woke up during this attack, but could not fight her off or do anything because at that point there was too much damage to himself done. So he unfortunately died. And Katherine then dragged his body downstairs and literally skinned him. Then, after this, she hung his body from a meat hook in the living room. Then she decapitated him and cut up pieces of his body to cook in a dish with potato, pumpkin, beets, zucchini, cabbage, squash, and gravy. She then made a dish for herself and started eating. After that, she laid down next to the headless, mutilated corpse of John and took a large number of pills and passed out. Then after this, John's co-workers heeded his warning the next morning and called the police after he didn't show up for his shift, and the police arrived to find Katherine Knight's gruesome crime scene and immediately detained her. And once she woke up, she claimed to have no memory of the night before at all. Now, this is absolutely a horrendous, terrible story. And I feel like some of you will love this, other of you, it might turn your stomach a little bit. And I'm sorry for those people. But I feel like this woman was just so evil. I mean, just to be able to do that, to keep having kid after kid after kid, and have literally somebody that you love and just sleep with them and then stab them 37 times. In my book, that's pretty bad. And that's not even the worst part. This is the worst part. Because in the kitchen, police found Price's head boiling in a pot of vegetables on the stove. Plus, on the table, they found 2 full plates, each labeled with a name. And in immense horror, the police realized that Katherine had planned to serve John Price's body parts to his children. Now, despite her claims that she had no recollection of that night, John Price died, and Katherine was quickly charged with his murder. Then, in October of 2001, her trial commenced, but didn't get very far. For reasons that still remain a mystery, Katherine changed her plea from innocent to guilty, and the judge adjourned the case without testimony. So she was escorted to the prison that day, and the judge ordered that her papers to be marked specifically as never to be released. Now, for the first time in history, a woman in Australia was given a life sentence without parole. And to this day, Katherine, nevertheless, maintains her innocence and refuses to accept responsibility for any of her actions. Now, like I said, I know this was probably a tough one to hear, but it was a story that nevertheless needed to be told, and I'm sure some of you probably already heard it. And if anything, I hope you learn something from this, whether it is to look for indicators from other people or to just be more aware of what's going on in yours or somebody else's relationship. That's all.